Hello, in today's section we are going to talk about the IELTS exam in general, and more importantly we're going to talk about part 1 of the IELTS. The question is, why do we need to know about IELTS? Because your exams at the end of this semester is going to be IELTS based, so it's very similar, if we don't say it's almost the same like the IELTS. So we've got 3 sections in each section that is very similar to IELTS. Let's get started now and talk about this test in general. So this is about the speaking exam. At the end of the semester, you're going to have 3 parts in the exam. Part 1 is much more what we call it personal topic. You discuss it with the examiner. And the second part is called a mini presentation, in which you discuss or you present an idea in 2 minutes. Of course, you're going to have 2 minutes also to think about the idea before you start speaking. And then the last section is called longer discussion, or a long discussion about a topic. So it's usually talking about the society or your country, or just generally nothing personal, but you have to express your opinion about something. Now, let's start with part 1. In part 1, first of all, we've got the introduction. It means when you enter the room and you introduce yourself to the examiner. This is not the exam yet. You show the examiner your ID, your university card, or your personal card. It's just to prove your identity. And then you start the interview. The interview is going to be for like 2 or 3 minutes. And you're going to discuss topics like hometown, study, work, and sport. Hometown, like for example, where do you live, who do you live with, how long have you been living there, etc. And you have to answer the questions, all of them. But please remember, when we're asking you personal questions, don't just give very simple answers. And we're gonna discuss this more in details when we're coming to things to do and things not to do in this section. Okay, so if you need to know more about these topics, you just go to Google and type IELTS speaking part 1 questions, okay, and you'll have all the questions and all the topics that you're looking for, and you can just have a look and try to practice by yourself if you want to practice for the exam. Okay, so this is very important to know even the topics and practice them, because they're going to be very simple, and don't think it's like this is the place where you can't speak. Okay, now number 4, the examiner is going to be looking at your pronunciation, fluency, vocabulary, and grammar. I'll explain each one. Pronunciation, it means, when we say pronunciation, we don't mean accent, so you don't have to speak the American or British accent or whatever. What you have to do is just to try to be understandable. I mean by understandable, so for example, don't say go as Joe, or job as gob, okay, or suggest or suggest, okay, good or as Judd. No, I mean when you say these words, actually you are changing the meaning of the word. Of course, we've got high respect to the Omani accent, but this is English and we have to speak it as it is. Okay, so yes, you have to pronounce the words as they are to make sure that they are understandable and for the examiner. We have to differentiate as well, is these are the common mistakes between, for example, live and leave. Okay, so some students, instead of saying, for example, I live in Nizwa, they would say I live in Nizwa. No, well, no. I mean, here your pronunciation is changing the meaning of the sentence. So you have to be careful when you are pronouncing a word very much. Okay, so pronunciation. So you need to make sure that you don't change the meaning and make a new word. Okay, fluency means, like for example, if I ask you where do you live, you don't say I live in Nizwa. If you're going to talk about yourself, I'm Suhail. I'm So when you have these long pauses, it means that you're not really fluent. Again, but remember, we all produce like some pauses in a time when we're speaking. But when you keep producing them all the time, it means you do have a problem. We need sometimes to think about what we're going to speak. So it's natural. But what we don't need is just keep doing it for a long time, almost all through the interview. So you have to be careful with this as well. When we're talking about vocabulary, are you using very basic vocabulary? Are you using something like special vocabulary to talk about this kind of particular topic? Uh, I mean, like some students, they keep it very simple whenever we're going to talk about this more, maybe vocabulary in the coming in a minute. I'll just move on, okay? And then we've got grammar. So you have to make sure that when you're talking about something that is happening, that is like a habit, you have to use a present simple. And when you talk about the story that happened with you in the past, so you have to use the past simple as well. So you have to be careful with the use of tenses and other like sentence structure, etc., and speak of full sentences. Now let's move. So this is just general, so it's 2 to 3 minutes. Topics are going to be very basic and personal. We're going to ask you, for example, if you're about hometown, it's going to be about your hometown, you studying, for example, what do you study, why did you choose this subject, etc. Sport, what's your favorite sport, how often do you play this sport, etc. So to know more, as I said, you just go to Google, and then I told you what we're going to be looking at. Okay, now, things to do and things to avoid in the interview. So, number one, be confident, of course. This is something very important. I think confidence would give you definitely some kind of fluency, would give you some relaxation, and relaxation would be able to speak, properly. I contact some people in order to be confident. They just keep looking down on the earth, or they just don't they keep avoiding looking at the examiner. Again, you don't have to stare at the examiner, but you just try to kind of be natural. Okay, so you have to be just kind of natural. Serious, I mean by this serious, like some students, they come to the interview, and I'm explaining this here. Don't chew a gum and don't smile a lot, okay? So some students come to the interview maybe because they know the teacher before, or the teacher have taught them before, but this is an exam. It's not in the class. Maybe in the class the teacher was a bit smooth with you. What was like you might have some funny moments, but here you don't have any funny moments. If you're chewing a gum, please spit it before you go to the interview. If you are in the interview, you don't smile. You've got just a question and you have to answer it. Okay, there is no way that you can just keep, for example, asking question, and then you go like as if you're telling your personal story, and then the personal story is funny, and then you start kind of uh, laughing and smiling and things like that. Well, no, we're looking at your language mainly. Okay, it's okay if you, again, it's okay if within the speech you can give a smile, it's okay. But I mean, when we're talking about laughing and going on serious, this is what we're talking about here. Number two, use high level of vocabulary. Like, for example, if we're going to talk about food, we can say the word cuisine. So try to learn some vocabulary. I'll tell you some story. Like, last semester, one of my students, she kept saying, for example, for anything she wants to describe, for example, beautiful, the food beautiful. If she wants to talk about like, let's say, sport, beautiful. If she want to talk about like English, beautiful. She was always using the word beautiful for describing anything she wanted to describe. Other students would use, for example, the word good and bad. So good and bad, for example, why do you play football? Because it's good. Why don't you play football? Because it's bad. Why do you like this food? Because it's good. Why don't you like this food? Because it's bad. Why did you study, for example, this subject? Because it's good. Why didn't you study this? Because it's bad. So you keep saying good and bad, good and bad, good and bad. They only know these basic words. So what you need to do in the exam, try to use a higher level of vocab. At the same time, try to variate the adjectives, okay, in order to speak or to get a higher mark. Okay, so for example, as I said, if you're going to talk about food, you can use the word cuisine. Okay, so like the Indian cuisine, the Omani cuisine, etc. So it means you have got something like high level of vocabulary. Now, number three, don't repeat the question words. Use synonyms. For example, do you like cake? And then you answer, yes, I like cake. Well, you're repeating the same kind of words of the questions. If you haven't got anything new in your sentence, you're just taking some words from the examiner. This is not going to reflect your strength of using English. So, for example, if we're going to talk about like, what other substitutions? I mean, what other words we can use instead of like? You can say I enjoy, I really enjoy if you want to stress it. I love, I prefer. So you could use many other like words instead of using the same word I like. And here we need also, it seems this is not here, or maybe in the next slide, but I'll mention it here. You have to speak in full sentences. So for example, do you like sports? Yes. This is not the answer that we're looking for. Okay. Where do you live? Nizwa. No. What's your name? Muhammad. No. So this is not the answer that we're looking for. Please remember, if you use just words, you are going to lose a lot of marks. I think you're going to get in each section, if we're going to talk about 4 sections, pronunciation, vocabulary, etc., you're going to get 1 or 2 in each section. So the total is maximum 8. So you're going to fail if you keep just answering by giving words. Okay, we're looking for your language. We need to know more about your language. So we need, you have to speak in full sentences. Expand your answer. The last thing you want to do is just to give very narrow answer. So when I, for example, ask you to tell me about what's your favorite sport. So for example, you might say football. My favorite sport is football. But this is not the full answer. You need to expand more. Why do you like it? When did you start liking it? Where, I mean, try to give extra 1 or 2 information about what you're talking about. It's not just saying the exact word. You have to expand. Okay. Now, moving to the next one. Don't think about reality, and this is a very big problem for students. For example, have you ever been to a zoo? They say no. Okay, suppose you have in part 2 of the IELTS, you might have a mini presentation to describe a zoo. Can you say I've never been to a zoo? No, you have to describe it. So don't think about the reality. I mean, even if the story, you can have some extra events in your story. You can make the story that you watched on TV your story. So I still remember one of my students last year when I asked her about like a place you visited in the past, and she said, I went to France, I visited Eiffel Tower, and there I practiced yoga. And then once she finished, I asked her, did you really go there? And she said no, but she got the full mark. Okay, so you have to remember that I don't really care about the reality. I'm not gonna call your father and mother and ask them, did they really do that? I'm not gonna ask you if you really like pizza or not. Okay, so you can just say whatever you want to say. I'm not going to check after you about the reality. It's up to you. You can just make it up. Okay, so number 6, speak full sentences. As I told you, if you don't speak full sentences, you're gonna fail. Okay, don't say I don't know. When we, IELTS exam in general, we're not asking you scientific questions. All the questions based on your like 18 years old, I guess you would be able to answer them. For example, as I told you, the example of zoo. If you've never been to a zoo, this doesn't mean you cannot describe it. Okay, so you've never been to a zoo, but this doesn't mean that you can describe it. You can say that there was a giraffe, there was an elephant, and the elephant was huge, though you've never been to and like a zoo. So you can't say I don't know in all the kind of the exam. You have to make it up. If you say I don't know, this means that you're not creative enough to speak about any topic. Because when I tell you, for example, if I ask you to describe France, you've never been to France, but this doesn't mean it's like a city. It's just like any city. Just imagine Muscat and talk about Muscat as if it's France. It's okay. Nobody's gonna know that. So have to be creative in making up sentences and describing something. So you cannot say I don't know. I'm not asking, for example, to talk about the theory of I don't know, whatever, physics or activity, whatever. So I'm not asking you about any scientific or physics or math even theory. I'm asking you just a very simple general knowledge question. And at the end of this, don't worry about perfect English. The more you worry about your English, the less marks you sorry, the more you worry about English, the less marks you'll get. Okay, and the less you worry, the more marks you get. So you don't have to worry a lot because we understand that you're a student and you're not going to get perfect mark or the full mark. You might have some mistakes, so relax and speak the way you speak. But before the exam, try to practice as much as possible. Okay, these are all things that I wanted to tell you in this video. Thank you and bye.